Hello, everybody. My name is Ronnie Jo Fisher. I'm with Tarleton State University in the Psychology Department, and this semester I'm taking the Senior Capstone course. Today I want to talk about what I'm calling the attention effect, or the effects of attention disorders on psychological well-being. Now, in the attention disorder umbrella, there are several different disorders that we could explore, but for our purposes, I'm looking specifically at ADD, attention deficit disorder, SPD, sensory processing disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, but primarily ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I really became motivated to research this topic when my 5-year-old son was diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year. It was very challenging to watch him endure some of the struggles with impulsivity, binge eating, food hoarding, just constant energy overload and the inability to focus. He even had some speech issues that needed to be addressed. So when we get into ADHD specifically, there is numerous research articles that you can find outlining what ADHD is. And Aoki et al. In 2020 described it as a chronic neurodevelopmental disorder, the main symptoms being inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. That is very common. The CDC did their most recent survey in 2016, where they found that 6.1 million children between the ages of 2 and 17 were living with an ADHD diagnosis. And of that 6.1 million, 64% of these children dealt with behavior or conduct issues on a regular basis. Some other issues or obstacles that these kiddos face is language delays. You know, most of our language is learned by observation, is learned by repetition and repeating what the adult individuals in our lives say. And when these children have trouble focusing or paying attention, they naturally have trouble with repetition and observational learning. The other one that's big is social development. These kiddos have a hard time building relationships with others when their behaviors are acting out or uncommon than what the other child is used to seeing. So there are actually studies that show that 90% of individuals with attention disorders also have a comorbidity. And comorbidities that are often associated with attention disorders are anxiety and depression. We also see, particularly in college students, eating disorders, binge eating, obesity, that sort of thing. But in kiddos, we'll see Tourette syndrome that may increase. Autism, substance abuse, and personality disorders are common as well. Now, there was a study that Borelli et al. Did in 2019 that focused on parents versus teachers in the ability to identify a potential attention disorder within the kids. And it was conclusive that the parents found the attention disorder to be a negative thing and were not as successful as the teachers in identifying the potential disorder. And I believe that. I find it common among parents that I know and myself. That it's a last resort to accept that attention disorder. So I began to think of my son and his psychological well-being or his fulfillment in life compared to my other children who do not have a similar diagnosis. And I really began to research psychological well-being. And in the field of psychology, from our perspective, psychological well-being is defined by optimal functioning. Now, C.D. Riff, he designed a psychological well-being scale in order to measure the psychological well-being of an individual. And his paper in 2013 addressed the 6 subscales that he used to develop this composite score. And those are autonomy, the ability to live independently, to self-govern, make your own choices. The next is environmental mastery, the ability to change or control your surroundings, whether it be the temperature of your room or putting on a sweater or how fast you drive, the ability to control those things. The purpose of life is another. It is the drive and motivation that shapes your behavior, including your vocation. Positive relationships. This is a mutually beneficial and enriching relationship. This is a challenge for individuals with attention disorders, especially those who were diagnosed at a young age. If we go back to Borelli's research, we'll find that the parents that found the attention disorders as a negative thing projected those feelings onto the children. And we know from previous attachment research that relationships are often built on the attachment that the child had with their parent in the beginning. So that is a struggle to build positive relationships and socially acceptable behaviors for a child or even an adult with attention disorders. The other two that we're going to focus on is personal growth, the ability to analyze and improve your behavior, and then self-acceptance, which is a big one. That's the ability to understand your own strengths, weaknesses, and limitations. This doesn't necessarily mean accepting those things and letting them hold you back or limit your success. It just means the ability to understand that they are there, but you can use that personal growth aspect to work on and change those behaviors. But I began to hypothesize that the number of diagnoses, because we know that attention disorders are often accompanied by something such as anxiety, that the number of diagnoses that an individual received was significantly negatively correlated to the psychological well-being. So I hypothesize that the more disorders and diagnoses that somebody received, the lower their psychological well-being score would be. Of course, similarly, my null hypothesis states that there will be no significant correlation between the number of diagnoses and the overall psychological well-being score. So in order to measure this, we had a sample of 64 participants, 36 female, 28 male, participants between the ages of 19 and 45 years old. 10 of our participants answered the survey on behalf of their minor children. But we looked at our independent variable, which was our number of diagnoses. 8 of our participants reported that they did not receive any diagnoses in the attention disorder or comorbidity areas. 30 of our individuals, our participants, reported that they had 1 diagnosis. And then 26, or the remaining amount, reported that they had at least 2 or more diagnoses in the attention disorder or comorbidity areas. Our dependent variable here was our psychological well-being. Now, we use the RIFS Psychological Well-Being Scale short form as 18 questions, a Likert scale between 1 and 7, 1 being strongly agree, 7 being strongly disagree. The scores of all 18 questions were totaled to give us our composite psychological well-being scale. In this scale, the higher the score, the higher the number, the higher the psychological well-being. So the better off somebody was psychologically in their well-being. Now, when we conducted our research, we used the Pearson correlation test. We're going to look at this here in my poster here. And I'll look over here at table 1. This is where we'll see the strength of our correlation between our diagnosis and our psychological well-being score. So like right here, we found that there was a negative 0.801 correlation between the diagnoses and psychological well-being score, which is significant, with the p-value being less than 0.001, we can conclude that there is a significant correlation, negative correlation, right here in this area. I want to draw particular attention, though, to the positive relationships. Remember, I talked about this being a weakness for a lot of these individuals. And this here concludes that there is a significant negative correlation between the number of diagnoses that these individuals have received and the positive relationships that they are able to develop at that negative 0.834 amount. And I find that interesting. I think that that's something that should be explored more. I feel like if we can maybe research this a little bit deeper, we may be able to develop methods or ideas on ways to help the attention lacking individuals to better develop these relationships and socially become more involved. Now, if we look here at Table 2, we'll find that the individuals who had no diagnoses had a mean score of 112.125. Then we'll go to the individuals who had one diagnosis, and they are at 106 as their mean score. And then we jump drastically to the individuals who have two or more diagnoses at 86.75. That's a 20-point difference. That is significant. And I like this table over here just for the visual. You'll see that the difference between 0, 1, and then 2, it just draws that line that shows that significant negative correlation there. Now, as I mentioned, if I had more time here, I would like to focus on the positive relationships. I would also look not just at the number of diagnoses, but the degree of the diagnosis, the depth of, let's say, the ADHD, how strong that is a factor in your everyday life. In relation to the positive relationships, again, I would really like to be able to develop a plan of action, educational resources for adolescents and adults who struggle with anxiety, who struggle with depression due to attention issues. I personally got a lot out of this study, just being able to understand the challenge that my son is going to deal with, and hopefully be able to address some of these issues better, understanding his mind, what he's thinking. And I hope that in the very short amount of time that I was able to spend with you guys, that you got a little bit out of this. I think really this is just a starting point, a foundation for some bigger and more in-depth research that is to come. I thank you for your time. Hope that you are all blessed. Have a great day.